Chapter 1. The morning of March 15th, 1987, started like any other Sunday in West Hollywood. The sun rose over the palm trees lining Sunset Boulevard, casting long shadows across the quiet residential streets, where dreams were made and sometimes destroyed. Rebecca Morgan's apartment building stood on a quiet corner of Fountain Avenue, a modest 3-story structure painted in faded peach, home to aspiring actors, musicians, and artists trying to make their mark in the entertainment capital of the world. Maria Gutierrez arrived at 7:30 in the morning, her cleaning supplies rattling in the canvas bag she carried. She had been cleaning apartments in the building for 3 years, and Rebecca Morgan had always been her favorite client. The young actress was kind, always left a tip on the kitchen counter, and never made unreasonable messes. Maria hummed softly as she climbed the stairs to apartment 212, her keys jingling against her hip. She knocked twice, as she always did, even though Rebecca had told her countless times to just let herself in. No answer came. Maria inserted her key into the lock and pushed the door open, calling out in her accented English. The apartment was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The living room looked normal at first glance. Rebecca's scripts were stacked neatly on the coffee table. A half-empty cup of tea sat on the end table, and the television was off. But something felt wrong. Maria couldn't quite place it, but the air felt heavy, oppressive, as if the apartment itself was holding its breath. She walked down the short hallway toward the bedroom, her footsteps muffled by the worn carpet. The bedroom door was partially open, and Maria pushed it wider with her fingertips. What she saw next would haunt her for the rest of her life. Rebecca Morgan lay on her bed, dressed in a white silk nightgown, her arms positioned carefully at her sides. Her face was pale, almost translucent in the morning light filtering through the curtains. An empty bottle of sleeping pills sat on the nightstand next to a glass of water and a handwritten note. Maria screamed. The sound echoed through the empty apartment and down the hallway. She stumbled backward, her cleaning supplies crashing to the floor, and ran back toward the living room. Her hands shook as she picked up the phone and dialed 911. Within 20 minutes, the apartment was filled with police officers, paramedics, and crime scene investigators. Detective Thomas Brennan arrived at 8:15, his tie already loosened despite the early hour. He was a veteran of the Los Angeles Police Department, with 20 years of experience and a reputation for thoroughness that sometimes bordered on obsession. Brennan stood in the doorway of the bedroom, his sharp gray eyes taking in every detail. The victim was young, late 20s perhaps, with long dark hair spread across the white pillow. Beautiful, even in death. The scene was almost too perfect, too staged. Something about it bothered him, though he couldn't immediately articulate what. Officer Sarah Chen approached him, her notebook open. She was young, in her second year on the force, eager and intelligent. Brennan had requested her specifically for his team, because she had an eye for details others often missed. The victim is Rebecca Morgan, 27 years old, Chen reported, reading from her notes. She's an actress, been in a few television shows and small film roles. According to the building manager, she lived alone, no boyfriend or roommate. The cleaning lady found her around 7:45 this morning. Brennan nodded slowly, still studying the scene. What do the paramedics say? Dead for approximately 6 to 8 hours, Chen replied. That would put time of death somewhere between midnight and 2 in the morning. There's a note on the nightstand. Brennan moved closer to the bed, careful not to disturb anything. He leaned down to read the note without touching it. The handwriting was neat. Almost too neat for someone who was supposedly distraught enough to take their own life. I can't do this anymore. The pressure, the lies, the things I've seen. I'm sorry to everyone I'm leaving behind. Forgive me. Rebecca, the detective straightened up, his jaw tight. He'd seen dozens of suicide notes over the years, and something about this one felt wrong. The language was too formal, too composed. People in genuine emotional distress didn't write notes that read like farewell letters in Victorian novels. Has anyone touched anything in here? Brennan asked. Just the paramedics to confirm death, Chen answered. The cleaning lady says she touched the door and nothing else. She's pretty shaken up. Get photos of everything, Brennan instructed. Every angle, every surface. And I want toxicology results as soon as possible. He paused, his eyes roaming the room once more. And check the windows and door for signs of forced entry. You think this isn't a suicide? Chen asked quietly. Brennan didn't answer immediately. He walked slowly around the bed, noting the position of the body, the placement of objects on the nightstand, the way the curtains were drawn. Everything was too orderly, too deliberate. I think we need to treat this as a suspicious death until we know more, he finally said. Let's not jump to any conclusions yet. As the crime scene team went about their work, Brennan moved into the living room. The apartment was small but tastefully decorated. Movie posters adorned the walls, mostly classic Hollywood films from the 1940s and 50s. A bookshelf held scripts, acting books, and novels. On a small desk near the window sat a typewriter with a half-finished letter still in the roller. Brennan examined the letter without touching it. It was addressed to someone named Jennifer and discussed an upcoming audition. The tone was upbeat, excited, not the words of someone planning to end their life that same night. The detective opened drawers carefully, searching for anything that might provide context. In the desk's bottom drawer, he found a leather-bound diary. He pulled on latex gloves before removing it, then flipped through the pages. The entries went back several months, detailing Rebecca's daily life, her auditions, her hopes and fears. The more recent entries caught his attention. 3 weeks before her death, Rebecca had written about a party at a producer's house in the Hollywood Hills. She mentioned feeling uncomfortable, watching things she didn't want to see. The entry was vague but troubled. A week later, another entry described a meeting with someone she referred to only as DL. The tone was anxious. He knows I saw something. He asked me to keep quiet. Promised me a role in his next film if I did. I don't know what to do. The final entry was dated the night before her death. They're watching me. I've seen the same car parked outside for 3 days now. Dark blue sedan. I tried to tell Jennifer, but she thinks I'm being paranoid. Maybe I am. Maybe this is all in my head. But I can't shake the feeling that I've made a terrible mistake. Brennan closed the diary and slipped it into an evidence bag. This was no suicide. He was certain of it now, but proving it would be another matter entirely. Chapter 2. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office was located on North Mission Road, a nondescript building that processed the city's dead with clinical efficiency. Brennan arrived at 2 in the afternoon, just as Dr. Patricia Walsh was finishing the preliminary autopsy on Rebecca Morgan. Dr. Walsh was in her mid-50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and reading glasses perched on her nose. She had performed thousands of autopsies over her career and had a reputation for being thorough and uncompromising in her findings. "Detective Brennan," she greeted him as he entered the examination room. "Your actress is an interesting case." Brennan approached the examination table where Rebecca's body lay covered with a white sheet. "How so, doctor?" Walsh picked up her clipboard and reviewed her notes. Cause of death appears to be acute barbiturate intoxication, consistent with the empty pill bottle found at the scene. Secobarbital, commonly prescribed for insomnia. The victim had a prescription filled 2 weeks ago. "But," Brennan prompted, sensing there was more. "But there are some inconsistencies," Dr. Walsh continued. "First, there's minimal foam or discoloration around the mouth, which is unusual in barbiturate overdoses. Second, I found slight bruising on her upper arms, consistent with someone gripping her firmly. The bruises are approximately 12 to 24 hours old. She could have gotten those anywhere," Brennan suggested, playing devil's advocate. "Possible," Dr. Walsh agreed. "But there's something else. Her stomach contents show she ingested the pills with alcohol, specifically red wine. However, there was no wine glass found at the scene, only water." Brennan felt a surge of vindication. Someone cleaned up after themselves. "It appears so," Dr. Walsh said. "I'm also waiting on full toxicology results, which should be back in a few days. But based on what I'm seeing, I can't definitively rule this a suicide. There are too many questions." Brennan thanked her and left the coroner's office with a growing sense of urgency. Someone had killed Rebecca Morgan and staged it to look like suicide. Now he needed to find out who and why. His next stop was the apartment of Jennifer Hayes, Rebecca's best friend. Jennifer lived in a slightly nicer building in Beverly Hills, a modern complex with a doorman and underground parking. She was also an actress, though less successful than Rebecca had been. Jennifer answered the door in workout clothes, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. When Brennan identified himself and explained why he was there, she invited him in without hesitation. The apartment was bright and airy, decorated in whites and soft pastels. Framed photographs covered one wall, many of them showing Jennifer and Rebecca together at parties, on set, at the beach. "I still can't believe she's gone," Jennifer said, her voice breaking. "We talked just 2 days ago. She seemed fine, maybe a little stressed, but nothing that would make me think." Brennan sat across from her in a white armchair. What was she stressed about? Jennifer wiped her eyes with a tissue. Work, mostly. She'd been auditioning a lot but hadn't booked anything major in a few months. You know how it is in this town. One day you're hot, the next day casting directors won't return your calls. Did she mention anyone threatening her or following her? Brennan asked. Jennifer hesitated. She said something a few weeks ago about feeling watched, but honestly, I thought she was just being paranoid. Rebecca could be like that sometimes, especially when she was stressed. Tell me about the party at the producer's house, Brennan said, watching her carefully. Jennifer's expression changed, became guarded. What party? Brennan pulled out his notebook. According to her diary, Rebecca attended a party in the Hollywood Hills about 3 weeks ago. She wrote that she saw something that made her uncomfortable. I don't know anything about that, Jennifer said quickly. Too quickly. Ms. Hayes, Brennan said gently but firmly, if you know something that might help us understand what happened to Rebecca, you need to tell me. Someone may have killed her. Jennifer's face went pale. Killed her? But I thought, the note said. The note may have been forged, Brennan said. We're investigating this as a suspicious death. Jennifer stood up and walked to the window, hugging herself. After a long moment, she turned back to face him. The party was at David Lancaster's house. He's a big producer, very powerful. Rebecca and I both went. She brought me as her +1. What happened at the party? Brennan asked. Jennifer's hands trembled. It started out normal. Fancy house, expensive wine, industry people schmoozing. But as the night went on, things got weird. Some of the older men were getting very friendly with young actresses. Too friendly. And David was taking people into his study one by one, having private conversations. Did Rebecca go into the study? Yes, Jennifer said quietly. She was in there for maybe 20 minutes. When she came out, she looked upset. She wanted to leave immediately. On the way home, she told me she'd seen something she shouldn't have, but she wouldn't tell me what. Why didn't you mention this before? Brennan asked. Because I was scared, Jennifer admitted. David Lancaster is one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. If Rebecca's death has anything to do with him, she trailed off, fear evident in her eyes. Brennan stood up. I need you to write down everything you remember about that party. Everyone who was there. Everything that happened. Can you do that? Jennifer nodded slowly. Detective, she said as he moved toward the door, be careful. People like David Lancaster don't get to where they are by playing nice. If he had something to do with this, he'll have protection. Lawyers, connections, maybe even people inside the department. Brennan's expression hardened. Let me worry about that. You just focus on remembering everything you can. Chapter 3. David Lancaster's production company was housed in a gleaming office building on Wilshire Boulevard. Lancaster Productions occupied the entire 10th floor, with panoramic views of Los Angeles, stretching from downtown to the ocean. Brennan arrived unannounced at 4:30 in the afternoon, his badge ready. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 30s with perfect makeup and an artificial smile, informed him that Mr. Lancaster was in a meeting. Brennan informed her that he could either wait for the meeting to end or interrupt it. She chose to interrupt it. 5 minutes later, David Lancaster emerged from a conference room, his expression pleasant, but his eyes calculating. He was a tall man in his early 50s, with silver hair styled expensively, and a tan that spoke of weekends in Palm Springs. His suit probably cost more than Brennan made in a month. Detective, how can I help you? Lancaster asked, extending his hand. Brennan shook it briefly. I need to ask you some questions about Rebecca Morgan. A flicker of something passed across Lancaster's face. Surprise? Concern? It was gone too quickly to identify. Terrible tragedy, Lancaster said smoothly. Rebecca was a talented young woman. I was shocked to hear about her suicide. How did you know it was suicide? Brennan asked. We haven't released those details to the media yet. Lancaster didn't miss a beat. I have friends in the department. Word travels fast in this town, Detective. I'm sure it does, Brennan said. Can we speak somewhere private? Lancaster led him to his personal office, a massive space with floor-to-ceiling windows and modern art on the walls. He sat behind his desk, gesturing for Brennan to take a seat across from him. What would you like to know? Lancaster asked. You hosted a party approximately 3 weeks ago, Brennan said. Rebecca Morgan attended. What can you tell me about that evening? Lancaster leaned back in his leather chair. I host parties frequently. Networking events, really. Industry people. Actors, directors, Writers. Rebecca may have been there. I honestly don't remember specifically. You don't remember specifically, Brennan repeated. She was in your study for 20 minutes. Lancaster's smile tightened slightly. Detective, do you know how many people I talk to in a given week? Hundreds. Maybe thousands. If Rebecca was at one of my parties and we spoke privately, it was probably about potential roles in upcoming projects. That's what these gatherings are for. What projects did you discuss with her? Lancaster spread his hands. I couldn't tell you without checking my notes. Like I said, I speak with many actors. Brennan changed tactics. When was the last time you saw or spoke with Rebecca? Probably at that party you mentioned. Lancaster said, whenever it was. I certainly didn't see or speak with her on the night she died, if that's what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Brennan said. I'm investigating a suspicious death and following up on leads. Suspicious? Lancaster's eyebrows rose. I understood it was suicide. Are you suggesting otherwise? The investigation is ongoing, Brennan said noncommittally. Did Rebecca ever mention to you that she felt threatened or watched? Not that I recall, Lancaster said. But again, I didn't know her well. We may have spoken a handful of times over the years. Brennan pulled out a small notebook. Can you provide me with a list of everyone who attended your party 3 weeks ago? Lancaster's expression cooled. I'm afraid that would be a violation of my guests' privacy. These are intimate gatherings for industry professionals. If you want a list, you'll need to come back with a warrant. That can be arranged, Brennan said. I'm sure it can, Lancaster replied. But you should know that I have excellent attorneys. They'll fight any warrant that doesn't have ironclad probable cause. And frankly, Detective, from what you've told me, you don't have much of anything except a tragic suicide. Brennan stood up. Thank you for your time, Mr. Lancaster. I'll be in touch. As he left the office, Brennan was more convinced than ever that David Lancaster was involved in Rebecca's death. But Jennifer had been right. Men like Lancaster had power, connections, and resources. Building a case against him would require more than suspicion and circumstantial evidence. Back at his desk at the police station, Brennan spent the evening reviewing everything they had so far. Rebecca's diary, witness statements, the preliminary autopsy findings. He made notes, drew connections, created a timeline. It was nearly 10 o'clock when Officer Chen knocked on his doorframe. Got something, she said, entering with a manila folder. I ran the vehicle description Rebecca mentioned in her diary. Dark blue sedan seen outside her apartment. Checked with the DMV and cross-referenced with known associates of David Lancaster. And? Brennan prompted. Chen placed a photograph on his desk. This is Marcus Chen. No relation to me. He's a private investigator. Used to be LAPD. Got forced out about 5 years ago for conduct issues. Since then, he's been doing private security and surveillance work, mostly for high-profile clients, including David Lancaster. Brennan studied the photograph. A man in his late 30s, Asian American, with a hard expression and cold eyes. Where can I find him? He has an office in Koreatown, Chen said, handing him an address. But Detective, if this guy was following Rebecca on Lancaster's orders, he's not going to just admit it. Probably not, Brennan agreed. But maybe we can rattle him a bit, see what shakes loose. I kept her 4. Marcus Chen's office was above a Korean barbecue restaurant on Western Avenue. The smell of grilled meat and garlic wafted up the narrow staircase leading to the second floor. The door had Chen's name painted on frosted glass, and no other identifying information. Brennan knocked firmly. After a moment, a voice called out to come in. The office was small and cluttered, with filing cabinets lining one wall and a desk piled with papers and surveillance equipment. Marcus Chen sat behind the desk, looking exactly like his photograph, perhaps a bit older in person. He glanced up at Brennan without surprise. Let me guess, he said. You're here about the Morgan girl. Brennan closed the door behind him. You were following her. Chen leaned back in his chair. Was I? Your car was parked outside her apartment for 3 days before she died, Brennan said. Dark blue sedan. She wrote about it in her diary. Lots of dark blue sedans in Los Angeles, Chen said casually. Brennan placed his badge on the desk. I can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your choice. Chen studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Look, I was hired to conduct surveillance. That's legal. I never approached her, never threatened her, just watched and reported back. Who hired you? Chen laughed without humor. You know I can't tell you that. Client confidentiality. Your client may be a murderer, Brennan said flatly. That got Chen's attention. His expression became serious, What are you talking about? The girl killed herself. It was all over the news this morning. The news is wrong, Brennan said. Someone staged it to look like suicide, and whoever hired you to follow her is the prime suspect. Chen stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street below. His jaw was tight. After a long pause, he spoke. I don't know anything about a murder. I was hired to follow her, document where she went, who she met with. Standard surveillance. Why? Brennan asked. Chen shrugged. Client didn't say. They never do. Was it David Lancaster? Chen turned back to face him. I'm not confirming or denying that. Brennan stepped closer. Listen to me very carefully. If you're protecting someone who killed a young woman, you're going to be charged as an accessory. That's serious time. Or you can cooperate. Tell me what you know, and maybe I can convince the DA to go easy on you. Chen looked conflicted. Finally, he walked back to his desk and pulled out a folder. He slid it across to Brennan. This is everything I collected. Photos, notes, timeline of her movements. Take it. Brennan opened the folder and flipped through the contents. Photographs of Rebecca leaving her apartment, going to auditions, meeting with friends, notes documenting her daily routine. And there was one photo that stood out. Rebecca meeting with a man in a coffee shop. The man's face was partially obscured, but his expensive suit and watch were visible. Who is this? Brennan asked, pointing to the man. I don't know, Chen said. But whoever he is, he met with Rebecca 3 times in the last 2 weeks of her life, always at the same coffee shop in Santa Monica. Always seemed very nervous, looking around like he thought he was being watched too. Did you report these meetings to your client? Yes, Chen said. And the last time I sent that report, 2 days before she died, I got a call telling me to stop the surveillance. Job was done. From Lancaster? Chen hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yes, from David Lancaster himself. Brennan closed the folder. I need you to come down to the station and give a formal statement. Chen shook his head. If I do that, I'm a dead man. You don't understand how deep this goes. Then make me understand, Brennan said. Chen walked to a filing cabinet and pulled out another folder, this one thicker. He opened it on the desk, revealing photographs and documents. What you're looking at is 3 years of work, he said. I've been documenting David Lancaster's activities for a while now. Why? Brennan asked. Because I used to be a cop, Chen said, and I still have a cop's instincts. When Lancaster first hired me, it was for legitimate work. But over time, I started noticing patterns. Young actresses being followed, meetings with powerful men, money changing hands. I started keeping my own records. Brennan studied the contents of the folder. There were photographs of Lancaster with various young women, documents showing payments to offshore accounts, notes about meetings at his Hollywood Hills mansion. This is incredible, Brennan said. Why haven't you gone to the police before? Because Lancaster has cops on his payroll, Chen said bluntly. I don't know who I can trust. For all I know, you're one of them. I'm not, Brennan said firmly. Chen studied him, then seemed to come to a decision. There's something bigger going on here than just Rebecca Morgan's death. Lancaster is part of a network. Producers, directors, agents, even some studio executives. They prey on young actresses, use them, threaten them if they try to speak out. And Rebecca threatened to speak out, Brennan said, understanding. I think she saw something at that party that was too much for her, Chen said. Maybe she told Lancaster she was going to the police. That would have been a death sentence. Brennan gathered both folders. You're coming with me to the station. We're going to put you in protective custody while I build this case. Chen looked uncertain. You really think you can take down someone like David Lancaster? I'm going to try, Brennan said. But I need your testimony in these documents. Chen nodded slowly. All right, but we need to be careful. If Lancaster finds out I'm cooperating, he'll destroy evidence and disappear. These people are connected everywhere. Then we move fast, Brennan said. Chapter 5. By 10 o'clock that night, Marcus Chen was secured in a safe house in the San Fernando Valley, with 2 trusted officers standing guard. Brennan returned to the station and spread all the evidence across his desk. Officer Sarah Chen joined him, and together they began piecing together the puzzle. So we have Rebecca attending a party where something traumatic happens, Sarah said, pointing to the timeline they'd created. She writes about it in her diary, mentions seeing something she shouldn't have. Then she has a private meeting with David Lancaster where he either threatens her or tries to bribe her into silence. And when that doesn't work, Brennan continued, he has Marcus Chen follow her to track her movements, probably to see if she's going to the police or talking to journalists. But then Rebecca meets with this unknown man 3 times, Sarah said, tapping the photographs. Who is he? Brennan studied the photos more closely. The man was in his 40s, well-dressed, but there was something about his body language that suggested fear or anxiety. Let's run facial recognition on him, Brennan said, and let's pull phone records for Rebecca's apartment. Maybe we can identify him that way. Sarah nodded and left to start the process. Brennan continued reviewing Marcus Chen's surveillance notes. The private investigator had been thorough, documenting not just Rebecca's movements but also noting other people in Lancaster's orbit who seemed to be under similar scrutiny. One name appeared multiple times: Daniel Foster, a mid-level producer who worked closely with Lancaster. According to Marcus's notes, Foster had been present at the party where Rebecca saw something disturbing. He'd also been seen meeting with Lancaster several times in the days following the party. Appearing agitated, Brennan made a note to interview Daniel Foster next. At midnight, Sarah returned with news. I got preliminary phone records for Rebecca's apartment, she said. There are multiple calls to a number registered to a Daniel Foster in Manhattan Beach. The last call was the day before she died. That's our mystery man, Brennan said, pulling up Foster's driver's license photo on the computer. It matched the man in the coffee shop photographs. Let's bring him in first thing tomorrow morning. There's something else, Sarah said. I ran Lancaster's financials, or at least what I could access without a warrant. He made a large cash withdrawal 3 days before Rebecca died. $50,000. Payment to a hired killer, Brennan said grimly. Maybe, Sarah agreed. But we'll need more than that. Good attorneys will explain away cash withdrawals, surveillance, even threatening conversations. We need direct evidence linking Lancaster to her death. The toxicology results will help, Brennan said. Dr. Walsh is rushing them through. And if we can get Daniel Foster to talk, tell us exactly what Rebecca saw and what Lancaster said to her, we might have enough for an arrest warrant. They worked through the night, building their case piece by piece. By dawn, they had assembled a comprehensive timeline and evidence package. At 7 a.m, Brennan and Sarah drove to Daniel Foster's house in Manhattan Beach, a modest home 2 blocks from the ocean. Foster answered the door in a bathrobe, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot. When Brennan identified himself and explained they needed to talk about Rebecca Morgan, Foster's reaction was immediate. He tried to close the door. Brennan blocked it with his foot. Mr. Foster, you can talk to us here voluntarily, or we can take you down to the station. Your choice. Foster looked terrified. After a moment, he stepped aside and let them in. The house was in disarray, with empty whiskey bottles on the coffee table and curtains drawn against the morning sun. Foster sat heavily on the couch and put his head in his hands. I knew someone would come eventually, he said quietly. Tell us about Rebecca Morgan, Brennan said, sitting across from him. Foster looked up, his eyes filled with guilt and fear. She was a good person, talented, kind. She didn't deserve what happened to her. What happened to her? Sarah asked gently. Foster took a shaky breath. 3 weeks ago, David Lancaster threw a party at his house. He does it all the time. Brings in young actresses. Tells them he can make their careers. Most of them don't realize what they're getting into until it's too late. What do you mean? Brennan asked, though he was beginning to understand. The parties start out normal, Foster explained. Good food, expensive wine, networking. But as the night goes on, some of the older men start getting inappropriate with the younger women. Lancaster takes certain girls into his study, has private conversations with them, makes offers, roles in exchange for silence about what goes on at these parties. And if they refuse? Sarah asked. Then he destroys their careers, Foster said simply. Blacklists them, spreads rumors, makes sure they never work in this town again. Rebecca refused, Brennan said. Foster nodded. She came to the party with her friend Jennifer. Everything was fine until she went into the study with Lancaster. I don't know exactly what he said to her, but when she came out, she looked horrified. She left immediately. What did she see? Brennan pressed. Foster stood up and walked to the window, keeping his back to them. She saw what we all saw but chose to ignore. Young women being exploited. Powerful men using their influence to take advantage of vulnerable people. And worse. Worse how? Sarah asked. Foster turned to face them, tears in his eyes. There's a core group, maybe 6 or 7 men, all very powerful in the industry. They don't just exploit these women for sex. They document it, use it as leverage, create a network of blackmail and control. Rebecca saw photographs that night, documents. Lancaster was careless, left them out on his desk. She saw names, faces, evidence of crimes. And she contacted you, Brennan said. Yes, Foster admitted. She called me the next day. We'd worked together on a small film a year ago, and she knew I was connected to Lancaster. She wanted to know if what she'd seen was real, if I knew about it. What did you tell her? That she needed to forget what she saw, Foster said, his voice breaking. I told her to delete any photos she might have taken, to never mention it to anyone. I warned her that Lancaster and his associates would destroy her if she tried to expose them. But she didn't listen, Sarah said. She couldn't, Foster replied. Rebecca had a conscience. She told me she was going to gather evidence, document everything she could remember, and take it to the police or the media. I begged her not to. I told her these men were too powerful, that they had connections everywhere. When was your last conversation with her? Brennan asked. The day before she died, Foster said. She called me and said she had everything she needed. Names, dates, photographs she'd managed to obtain. She was going to take it all to the Los Angeles Times the next morning. Did you tell Lancaster? Brennan asked. Foster's silence was answer enough. Oh God, Sarah breathed. I didn't have a choice, Foster said desperately. Lancaster called me that same evening, asked if I'd heard from Rebecca. He already knew we'd been meeting. I think he had someone following both of us. I told him she was planning to go to the press. I thought maybe if he knew, he could convince her to stop, offer her money, or a major role. I didn't think he would. Kill her, Brennan finished. Foster collapsed back onto the couch, sobbing. I've been living with this guilt for days. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face. Where's the evidence she collected? Sarah asked. Foster shook his head. I don't know. She said she was keeping it somewhere safe, somewhere Lancaster would never find it. She wouldn't tell me where. Brennan and Sarah exchanged glances. If Rebecca had hidden evidence before her death, finding it could make the case. Mr. Foster, Brennan said, you're going to come down to the station and give a formal statement about everything you just told us. And then you're going into protective custody, just like Marcus Chen. Foster looked up. Marcus is cooperating? He is, Brennan confirmed. And so are you now. Between your testimony and his evidence, we might actually be able to take David Lancaster down. Chapter 6. With Daniel Foster's confession on record and Marcus Chen's surveillance documentation, Brennan felt they finally had enough to approach the district attorney about filing charges. But first, they needed to find the evidence Rebecca had supposedly hidden. Brennan returned to Rebecca's apartment, which was still sealed as a crime scene. He spent hours searching every corner, looking for anywhere she might have concealed documents or photographs. He checked behind picture frames, inside book covers, under the mattress, in the freezer. Nothing. He sat on the couch, frustrated, and looked around the small living room. Where would a smart young woman hide something she knew powerful people would search for? His eyes landed on the movie posters adorning the walls. Classic films. Casablanca, Sunset Boulevard, All About Eve. Brennan stood and examined each poster carefully. The third one, All About Eve, had a slight bulge behind the frame. His pulse quickened as he carefully removed it from the wall and opened the back. Inside, pressed between the poster and the backing, was a large manila envelope. He placed it on the coffee table and opened it carefully. Inside were photographs, documents, and handwritten notes. The photographs showed David Lancaster and several other men at what appeared to be the party Rebecca had attended. But these weren't innocent party photos. They showed illegal activities, exploitation, evidence of crimes that would shock the public. The documents included bank records showing payments to offshore accounts, non-disclosure agreements that appeared to have been signed under duress, and a ledger listing names of young actresses alongside dates and dollar amounts. Rebecca had been thorough. She'd documented everything she could, created a detailed record of what she'd witnessed and discovered. This was explosive evidence that could bring down not just Lancaster, but potentially a dozen other powerful men in Hollywood. Brennan immediately called Sarah Chen. I found it, he said. Rebecca's evidence. It's everything we need. I'll meet you at the station, Sarah replied. 2 hours later, Brennan was sitting in the office of District Attorney Margaret Sutherland, spreading the evidence across her desk. Sutherland was in her early 60s, a tough prosecutor with a reputation for taking on difficult cases. She studied the materials silently for nearly 30 minutes, occasionally asking questions or requesting clarification. Finally, she looked up at Brennan. This is substantial, she said, but it's also incredibly dangerous. You're talking about prosecuting some of the most powerful men in Los Angeles. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Brennan said. These people have resources we can't match, Sutherland warned. The best defense attorney's money can buy. Politicians in their pockets. They'll fight this with everything they have. Then we fight harder, Brennan replied. Rebecca Morgan deserves justice. So do all the other women these men have victimized. Sutherland nodded slowly. All right. I'll authorize arrest warrants for David Lancaster and the others identified in these documents. But we need to move fast and coordinate carefully. If even one of them gets tipped off, they'll all scatter. Brennan leaned forward. When do we move? Tomorrow morning, Sutherland said. 6 a.m. We'll hit all their locations simultaneously. Homes, offices, anywhere they might be. And detective, she added, be prepared for blowback. This is going to create a firestorm. I'm ready, Brennan said. Chapter 7. The arrests took place at dawn on March 22nd, 1 week after Rebecca Morgan's death. Brennan personally led the team that went to David Lancaster's mansion in the Hollywood Hills. The house was enormous, all glass and modern architecture, with views stretching to the ocean. Lancaster answered the door in silk pajamas and a robe, his expression moving from surprise to anger as Brennan read him his rights. You're making a terrible mistake, Lancaster said coldly as the handcuffs clicked into place. We'll let a jury decide that, Brennan replied. By 8 o'clock that morning, all 7 men identified in Rebecca's evidence had been arrested and booked. The news media descended on the police station, cameras and reporters crowding the entrance. The story was already breaking on local television stations, with headlines about Hollywood's dark secrets and allegations of a criminal conspiracy. Brennan spent the day giving statements to prosecutors and coordinating with the investigative team. The evidence was being cataloged, witnesses were being interviewed, and the full scope of the conspiracy was beginning to emerge. It was even worse than he'd initially thought. But then, things started to go wrong. By afternoon, Lancaster had been released on $1 million bail, posted by anonymous benefactors. His attorneys held a press conference declaring his innocence and suggesting that Rebecca Morgan had been an unstable young woman who'd created false allegations. By evening, 2 of the other arrested men had also been released on bail. Their lawyers were already filing motions to suppress evidence, claiming illegal search and seizure. Brennan sat in Sutherland's office, watching the news coverage with growing concern. They're spinning this already, he said. Of course they are, Sutherland replied grimly. They have the best crisis management team's money can buy, but we have the evidence. That's what matters. Over the following days, however, the case began to unravel. Key witnesses started recanting their statements or claiming they'd been pressured by police. Documents mysteriously disappeared from evidence storage, and most damaging of all, Dr. Patricia Walsh, the coroner, was suddenly transferred to a different jurisdiction, and a new medical examiner issued a revised report ruling Rebecca's death as suicide. Brennan was furious. He stormed into Captain Richard Morrison's office demanding answers. What the hell is going on? He shouted. Evidence is disappearing. Witnesses are changing their stories. And now the coroner's report has been changed. Captain Morrison was a heavy-set man in his late 50s, who'd been with the department for 30 years. He looked uncomfortable. Detective, there are pressures coming from above. People are making phone calls, pulling strings. Who? Brennan demanded. Morrison sighed. Politicians, business leaders, people with connections to the men you arrested. They're applying pressure at every level. The chief is getting calls from the mayor's office. The mayor is getting calls from Sacramento. This goes all the way to the top. So, what are you telling me? Brennan asked. That we're just going to let these men walk? I'm telling you to be realistic, Morrison said. Yes, you found evidence. Yes, it looks bad. But without witnesses willing to testify, without the coroner's report supporting murder, without the physical evidence that's somehow gone missing, what case do we have? We have Rebecca's hidden evidence, Brennan said, which their lawyers will argue was forged or tampered with, Morrison replied. They'll claim Rebecca was mentally unstable, that she created false documents as part of some delusion. They'll destroy her reputation to save themselves. Brennan felt sick, so they just get away with it. Morrison stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city. Off the record? He said quietly. Yes, probably. This is how it works in Los Angeles, detective. The powerful protect each other. They have too much money, too many connections, too much influence. Sometimes justice doesn't win. That's not acceptable, Brennan said. Morrison turned to face him. Then find another way. Work the case quietly. Build something airtight that they can't tear apart. But for now, you need to back off. That's an order. Brennan left the office feeling defeated. He called Sarah Chen and Marcus Chen, meeting them at a quiet diner in Silver Lake. Both men looked as frustrated as he felt. "They're burying it," Marcus said, stirring his coffee absently. "I've seen this happen before. It's why I left the force." "There has to be something we can do," Sarah said. Brennan spread his hands helplessly. "I've been thinking about that. The criminal case is falling apart, but maybe we approach it differently. Civil suits, media exposure, federal investigation. You think the FBI would take this on?" Marcus asked skeptically. "Maybe," Brennan said, "if we can frame it as racketeering or organized crime. But honestly, I don't know. These men have survived scandals before. They always do." They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Sarah spoke. "What about Rebecca's friend, Jennifer Hayes? She was at that party. Could she go public? Tell her story to the media?" "She's terrified," Brennan said, "and I don't blame her. She's seen what happens to women who speak out against powerful men. Maybe she doesn't have to do it alone," Marcus suggested. "What if we got all the victims together? Safety in numbers." "Finding them and convincing them to come forward would take months," Brennan said. "And every day we wait. Lancaster and his associates are destroying evidence and intimidating potential witnesses." They eventually parted ways with no clear solution. Brennan drove home through the Los Angeles night. The lights of the city spread out below him like a glittering web. Somewhere in those lights were men who'd gotten away with murder and worse, and somewhere else were women living in fear, their careers destroyed, or their lives threatened into silence. He thought about Rebecca Morgan, about her courage in gathering that evidence, about her determination to expose the truth. She'd paid for that courage with her life, and now it seemed like her death would go unavenged. Chapter 8. 3 months passed. The criminal charges against David Lancaster and the others were dropped due to insufficient evidence and the revised coroner's report. The district attorney issued a statement expressing regret, but citing the lack of witnesses and conflicting medical opinions. Brennan continued working cases, but the Rebecca Morgan investigation haunted him. He kept the files at home, going through them in the evenings, looking for something he might have missed. In June of 1987, something unexpected happened. Jennifer Hayes contacted him, asking to meet. They met at the same coffee shop in Santa Monica, where Rebecca had met with Daniel Foster. Jennifer looked different, thinner, harder somehow, but there was determination in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I've been talking to other women," she said without preamble. "Actresses who've had experiences with Lancaster and his associates. Some of them are willing to tell their stories." "To who?" Brennan asked. "To a reporter at the Los Angeles Times," Jennifer said. "Her name is Catherine Brooks. She's been investigating Hollywood corruption for years. She wants to write a comprehensive exposé." "Will these women go on record?" Brennan asked. "Some will," Jennifer said. "Others want to remain anonymous. But together, their stories create a pattern that can't be ignored." "Lancaster will sue for libel," Brennan warned. "Let him," Jennifer said fiercely. "Maybe he'll win in court, but the stories will be out there. People will know. And maybe, just maybe, it will make it harder for men like him to prey on vulnerable women." Brennan felt a spark of hope for the first time in months. "When does the story run?" "Next month," Jennifer said. "Catherine wants to be thorough, get everything fact-checked and verified. But it's happening." The article was published on July 12, 1987. It was a massive, detailed exposé that filled several pages of the Los Angeles Times Sunday edition. The headline read, "Hollywood's Hidden Abuse: How Powerful Men Prey on Aspiring Actresses." The article detailed the allegations against David Lancaster and 6 other men, including testimony from 15 women. It included information about Rebecca Morgan's death and the subsequent failed prosecution. It raised questions about corruption within the police department and the district attorney's office. The response was immediate and explosive. Other newspapers picked up the story. Television news programs dedicated segments to it. Women's advocacy groups held protests outside Lancaster Productions. Several actresses who weren't part of the original article came forward with their own stories. David Lancaster held another press conference, vehemently denying all allegations and threatening to sue the Los Angeles Times for defamation. His attorneys filed a massive lawsuit seeking damages, but the court of public opinion had turned against him. Film studios began quietly distancing themselves from Lancaster Productions. Projects were canceled. Actors and directors who'd worked with Lancaster issued statements condemning abuse in the industry. Brennan watched it all unfold from his desk at the police station. It wasn't the justice he'd wanted. Lancaster and the others weren't going to prison, but their reputations were destroyed, their power diminished. That was something. Sarah Chen stopped by his desk one afternoon in August. "You see the news?" she asked. 3 of the major studios have announced new policies regarding harassment and abuse. They're creating hotlines and investigation procedures. "It's a start," Brennan said. "It's because of you," Sarah said. "Because you didn't give up even when everyone told you to." "I gave up on the criminal case," Brennan reminded her. "But you kept the evidence safe," Sarah replied. "You made sure Rebecca's story got told. That matters." Brennan nodded slowly. He thought about Rebecca Morgan, about her courage and her determination to expose the truth. Maybe this was the justice she would have wanted. Not perfect, but something. A crack in the system. A light shining into dark places. Chapter 9. The lawsuit David Lancaster filed against the Los Angeles Times dragged on for 2 years. In June of 1989, it was finally settled out of court. The terms were confidential, but the Times never retracted the story. Lancaster's production company went bankrupt in 1990. He moved to Europe, trying to rebuild his career there, but his reputation followed him. He eventually retired from the film industry entirely. Of the 7 men originally arrested, 3 faced civil suits from their victims. 2 settled out of court for undisclosed sums. 1 fought the case and lost, ordered to pay damages of $3 million. Detective Thomas Brennan remained with the LAPD until his retirement in 2002. He never forgot the Rebecca Morgan case. In his home office, he kept a framed photograph of her that Jennifer Hayes had given him. Young, beautiful, full of promise and talent. Sarah Chen rose through the ranks of the police department, eventually becoming a lieutenant. She specialized in cases involving violence against women and used the lessons learned from the Rebecca Morgan investigation to build stronger cases. Marcus Chen left Los Angeles and relocated to San Francisco, where he opened a legitimate private investigation firm focusing on corporate security. He occasionally consulted with law enforcement on surveillance cases. Daniel Foster provided testimony in several of the civil suits against Lancaster and the others. The guilt he felt over his role in Rebecca's death never left him. He left the film industry and became an advocate for abuse victims, founding a non-profit organization that provided support and legal assistance to people facing exploitation in entertainment. Jennifer Hayes continued acting, but became increasingly involved in advocacy work. She helped found one of the first organizations specifically dedicated to combating sexual harassment in Hollywood. She gave frequent interviews about her experiences and Rebecca's death, keeping the story alive in public consciousness. The case officially remained open in LAPD files as an unsolved suspicious death. The murder charges were never refiled, but neither was it definitively ruled a suicide. In 2017, 30 years after Rebecca's death, the entertainment industry was rocked by new revelations about powerful men using their positions to exploit and abuse women. The movement that emerged brought renewed attention to cases like Rebecca Morgan's. Several documentaries and investigative reports revisited her story. New witnesses came forward, people who'd been too afraid to speak in 1987, but felt empowered by the changing cultural climate. They provided additional details about the parties at Lancaster's mansion, the network of abuse, the complicity of people who'd looked the other way. Thomas Brennan, long since retired, was interviewed for several of these documentaries. Now in his 70s, his memory of the case remained sharp. He still believed David Lancaster had ordered Rebecca Morgan's murder, though he'd never been able to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. In one documentary interview, Brennan said, "Rebecca Morgan was 27 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She had talent, ambition, and most importantly, she had courage. She saw something wrong and decided to stand up against it, knowing the risk. That's heroism. And even though the system failed her, even though her killers were never brought to justice, her story mattered. It helped shine a light on abuse in Hollywood. It made it a little bit harder for predators to operate. That's her legacy." Jennifer Hayes, also interviewed, added, "I think about Rebecca every day. I wonder what she would have accomplished, what roles she would have played, what impact she would have had. The tragedy isn't just that she died young. It's that she was killed for trying to do the right thing. That's the real dark secret of Hollywood. Not just that abuse happens, but that the system protects abusers and silences victims." David Lancaster died in 2019 at the age of 85, never having faced criminal charges for Rebecca's death. In his obituaries, His later career controversies were mentioned prominently alongside his earlier successes. The Rebecca Morgan case became a touchstone in discussions about power, abuse, and accountability in the entertainment industry. Law schools used it as a case study in the challenges of prosecuting wealthy defendants. Film schools discussed it as an example of systemic problems in Hollywood. Advocacy groups cited it as evidence of the need for stronger protections for vulnerable workers. A small memorial was placed on Fountain Avenue in West Hollywood, near where Rebecca's apartment had been. It bore a simple plaque, "In memory of Rebecca Morgan, 1960-1987, actress, truth seeker, her courage lives on." Chapter 10. In the months following the failed prosecution, Detective Brennan found himself increasingly isolated within the department. His colleagues avoided him in the hallways. His cases were reassigned without explanation. Captain Morrison called him into his office in late April of 1987 with news that surprised no one. "You're being transferred," Morrison said without preamble. "Valley Bureau, Property Crimes Division." Brennan had expected as much. "This is punishment for not letting the Morgan case go." "This is protection," Morrison corrected. "There are people who want you off the force entirely. I convinced them that burying you in the valley was enough. Take it and be grateful." Brennan leaned back in his chair. "Who are these people?" Morrison's expression was grim. "You really want to know? Fine. 3 city council members, a deputy chief, 2 lawyers who represent half the studio heads in Los Angeles. They've all made calls about you. Said you're reckless, that you're pursuing vendettas against respected businessmen, that you're damaging the city's relationship with the entertainment industry. The entertainment industry that covers up murders," Brennan said flatly. "You can't prove it was murder," Morrison replied. "The medical examiner ruled it suicide. The evidence doesn't support homicide charges. At some point, you have to accept that maybe you're wrong." "I'm not wrong," Brennan said. "Then you're going to have a very frustrating career," Morrison told him. The transfer took effect in May. Brennan spent the next 3 years investigating burglaries and auto thefts in the San Fernando Valley, far from the glamour and corruption of Hollywood. But he never stopped thinking about Rebecca Morgan. At home, he continued his own investigation. He subscribed to industry trade publications, tracking David Lancaster's projects and public appearances. He maintained contact with Jennifer Hayes and Marcus Chen, trading information and theories. He built a massive file of newspaper clippings, notes, and documents, all stored in banker's boxes in his garage. His wife, Linda, worried about his obsession. They'd been married for 15 years, and she'd never seen him so consumed by a case. "You need to let this go," she told him one evening as he sat at the kitchen table surrounded by files. "It's eating you alive." "A woman was murdered," Brennan said without looking up. "Her killer is walking free. How am I supposed to let that go?" "By remembering that you're just one detective," Linda replied gently. "You can't fix everything that's broken in this city. You'll drive yourself crazy trying." "Maybe," Brennan admitted. "But if I don't try, who will?" Meanwhile, the lives of everyone connected to the case continued to unravel in various ways. Jennifer Hayes found her acting career stalling. Auditions that had once come easily dried up. Her agent dropped her, citing lack of opportunities. When she confronted him, he admitted, off the record, that her name had been flagged by several casting directors as trouble, blacklisted. Jennifer said bitterly to Sarah Chen over coffee one afternoon in June, "That's what they've done. Punished me for being Rebecca's friend, for cooperating with the investigation." "Can you prove it?" Sarah asked. Jennifer laughed without humor. "How do you prove a whisper campaign? How do you prove that conversations happen behind closed doors, where your name gets mentioned and everyone nods and moves on to the next actress?" Marcus Chen faced his own consequences. His private investigation business, which had been thriving, suddenly lost most of its clients. Word had spread that he'd cooperated with police against David Lancaster. In an industry built on loyalty and discretion, that made him radioactive. He considered leaving Los Angeles entirely, but ultimately decided to stay and rebuild. "If I run," he told Brennan during one of their occasional meetings, "then they win completely. At least here I can keep watching, keep documenting. Maybe someday it'll matter." Daniel Foster suffered the most visible downfall. Racked with guilt over his role in Rebecca's death, he developed a drinking problem that quickly spiraled out of control. He lost his job at the production company in August of 1987. His wife left him in September, taking their 2 children. By October, Foster was living in a cheap motel in North Hollywood, drinking away what remained of his savings. Sarah Chen tracked him down there one evening, finding him in a room that smelled of whiskey and despair. "Why are you here?" Foster asked, slumped in a chair by the window. "To check on you," Sarah said, "and to ask if you'd be willing to testify if we ever get another chance to prosecute Lancaster." Foster laughed bitterly. "There won't be another chance. Men like Lancaster don't face consequences. They just keep going, keep destroying lives. And the rest of us either look away or get destroyed ourselves." "Is that what you're doing?" Sarah asked. "Destroying yourself?" "What else is there?" Foster replied. "I helped kill that girl. Maybe not directly, but I told Lancaster what she was planning. I might as well have put the pills in her hand myself." "You can still do something meaningful," Sarah urged. "Help us build a case. Talk to reporters. Go public with what you know. And end up like Rebecca?" Foster shook his head. "I'm not that brave, or that stupid, depending on how you look at it." Sarah left the motel room feeling defeated. She reported back to Brennan that Foster was in bad shape and unlikely to be a reliable witness, even if they did reopen the case. Chapter 11. The story that journalist Catherine Brooks eventually published in July of 1987 was the result of months of painstaking work. She'd started investigating Hollywood abuse independently after hearing rumors about David Lancaster's parties from sources within the industry. When Jennifer Hayes approached her with information about Rebecca Morgan's death, Catherine saw the connection immediately. This wasn't just about parties and inappropriate behavior. This was about a systematic network of exploitation backed by power and money. Catherine's investigation led her to women across Los Angeles, from struggling actresses to former studio employees. Many had stories about Lancaster or men in his circle. Most were too afraid to go on record, but their accounts, taken together, painted a damning picture. One woman, speaking on condition of anonymity, described being assaulted at one of Lancaster's parties in 1984. She'd tried to report it to the police, but her complaint had been quietly buried. She received threatening phone calls for weeks afterward, and eventually left Los Angeles entirely. Another woman, a former assistant at Lancaster Productions, described her job as essentially procuring young women for Lancaster and his associates. She was instructed to invite attractive actresses to parties, to make sure they drank enough to lower their inhibitions, to look the other way when things turned ugly. "I told myself I was just doing my job," the woman said, "that what these men did wasn't my responsibility. But I knew, we all knew, and we said nothing because we wanted to keep our jobs, our access, our place in the industry." Catherine also interviewed law enforcement sources who spoke anonymously about pressure to drop investigations into powerful entertainment figures. One retired detective described being ordered by superiors to close a case involving a prominent director in 1981, despite having strong evidence of criminal behavior. "The system protects them," the detective said. "Always has. You learn early in your career that there are people you don't touch, investigations you don't pursue too aggressively. Cross that line and you find yourself directing traffic in the middle of nowhere." When Catherine's article finally ran, it caused exactly the firestorm Brennan had hoped for, but it also triggered a massive backlash. David Lancaster's defamation lawsuit against the Los Angeles Times sought $50 million in damages. His attorneys argued that the article was a hit piece based on anonymous sources and unverified allegations, designed to destroy the reputation of a respected film producer. The Times stood by the story, with editor Michael Richardson issuing a statement defending Catherine's reporting and promising to vigorously fight the lawsuit. "We stand behind our journalist and the courageous women who came forward to tell their stories," Richardson said at a press conference. But the pressure was intense. Advertisers threatened to pull their support. Studio executives called Times management, expressing concern about the article's impact on the entertainment industry's image. Politicians who received campaign contributions from entertainment companies suggested that the newspaper was being irresponsible. Catherine Brooks faced her own personal attacks. Lancaster's attorneys hired private investigators who dug into her background, looking for anything they could use to discredit her. They leaked information about a lawsuit she'd been involved in years earlier, taking quotes out of context to make her seem unstable and biased. She received threatening letters at her office and her home. Her car was vandalized twice. Anonymous phone calls came at all hours, sometimes threatening violence, other times offering money if she'd retract the story. "I expected pushback," Catherine told Brennan when they met for coffee in August. "But I didn't expect this level of coordinated attack. They're trying to destroy my credibility, my career. my sense of safety. All because I told the truth. Welcome to what Rebecca Morgan experienced, Brennan said grimly. Now you understand why she ended up dead. The article did have positive effects, though. It emboldened other journalists to investigate similar stories. Over the following months, additional exposés appeared in various publications, each revealing new aspects of abuse and exploitation in Hollywood. A piece in Variety detailed the casting couch phenomenon, describing how aspiring actresses were routinely pressured into sexual relationships with producers and directors in exchange for roles. Industry insiders estimated that at least 30% of female performers had experienced some form of sexual coercion during their careers. The Hollywood Reporter ran an investigation into the use of non-disclosure agreements to silence abuse victims. The article revealed that major studios and production companies had paid out millions of dollars in settlements over the years, always with clauses preventing victims from discussing what had happened to them. Even television news programs began covering the story. 60 Minutes aired a segment in November of 1987, featuring interviews with several actresses who described their experiences with harassment and abuse. The segment included a brief mention of Rebecca Morgan's unsolved death and the failed prosecution of David Lancaster. All of this attention created a cultural moment. For the first time, people outside the entertainment industry were having conversations about power dynamics in Hollywood, about how the system protected predators, about the price women paid for pursuing their dreams. But cultural moments fade, and powerful people are patient. Chapter 12. By 1988, the intensity of media attention had begun to wane. The lawsuit against the Los Angeles Times dragged on, with endless motions and depositions that gradually exhausted public interest. New scandals emerged to capture headlines. The entertainment industry, with its vast public relations machinery, worked to change the narrative. Studios announced new policies and guidelines regarding workplace conduct. Press releases touted diversity initiatives and respect in the workplace programs. Industry organizations created hotlines for reporting abuse, though skeptics noted these were often staffed by people with close ties to the same executives accused of misconduct. It was a masterclass in damage control. Acknowledge the problem in vague terms, promise reform, wait for attention to shift elsewhere, then continue largely as before. David Lancaster maintained a low profile during this period. He stopped hosting his infamous parties. His production company released fewer films, focusing on smaller projects that didn't require major studio financing. He gave no interviews and made no public appearances. But behind the scenes, he was rebuilding. Using connections cultivated over decades, he began positioning himself as a victim of a media witch hunt. He told anyone who would listen that he'd been unfairly targeted by an ambitious reporter and a crusading detective with a personal vendetta. Some people believed him. The entertainment industry had short memory for scandals, especially when they involved powerful figures who still had the ability to greenlight projects and make careers. By 1989, Lancaster was quietly producing again. His name appeared in the credits of mid-budget thrillers and dramas, often buried as an executive producer rather than prominently featured. He'd learned to operate in the shadows, to exercise power without attracting scrutiny. Detective Brennan watched this resurrection with frustration bordering on despair. He'd been right about everything. Rebecca had been murdered. Lancaster had ordered it. A conspiracy had covered it up. But being right meant nothing without the power to act on it. His marriage was suffering. Linda had grown tired of his obsession, his inability to let go of a case that had been officially closed for years. They argued frequently about his late nights reviewing files, his contacts with witnesses the department had told him to stop communicating with, his refusal to move on. In March of 1989, exactly 2 years after Rebecca's death, Linda asked for a separation. "I love you," she told him, tears streaming down her face. "But I can't watch you destroy yourself over this anymore. You're not sleeping. You're drinking too much. You're putting your career at risk. For what? A case you can't solve? Justice you can't deliver? It matters," Brennan said weakly. "I know it does," Linda replied. "And that's what makes this so hard. You're a good man trying to do the right thing. But you can't sacrifice everything for one case, Tom. You just can't." She moved out the next week. Brennan sat alone in their house, surrounded by files and evidence that meant nothing to anyone but him, and wondered if she was right. Maybe some injustices couldn't be corrected. Maybe some killers got away with it. Maybe the best he could do was accept that and move on. But he couldn't. Every time he considered letting it go, He'd think of Rebecca Morgan's face in that autopsy photo. 27 years old, beautiful, talented, dead because she'd tried to expose the truth. She deserved better than to be forgotten. So he kept investigating, quietly now, on his own time, without the department's knowledge or support. He cultivated sources within the entertainment industry, people who fed him information about Lancaster's activities. He tracked financial records, looking for patterns. He stayed in touch with the women who'd spoken to Catherine Brooks, checking on them, seeing if they'd remembered any additional details. It was Sarah Chen who kept him grounded during this period. She'd been promoted to detective and was building an impressive record with the LAPD, but she never forgot the Rebecca Morgan case or the lessons it had taught her about institutional corruption. She met with Brennan regularly, usually at diners or coffee shops far from police headquarters. They'd compare notes, discuss strategy, debate whether there was any path forward for the case. "The evidence is still there," Sarah said during one of these meetings in June of 1989. "Rebecca's hidden documents, Marcus Chen's surveillance records, Daniel Foster's testimony. It's all still valid, but without the coroner's report supporting homicide, we have no foundation," Brennan replied. "Everything else is circumstantial. Any decent defense attorney tears it apart." "Then we need to challenge the revised coroner's report," Sarah suggested. "Find out who pressured Dr. Walsh to change her findings, prove the second medical examiner was compromised." "How?" Brennan asked. "Walsh transferred to San Diego and won't return our calls. The second examiner, Dr. Richard Drummond, has an impeccable reputation. We have no evidence he was pressured or paid off." "Maybe not yet," Sarah said. "But people make mistakes. They leave trails. We just have to find them." It was this determination that eventually led to a breakthrough, though not in the way either of them expected. Chapter 13. In October of 1989, Dr. Patricia Walsh contacted Brennan out of the blue. She was dying of cancer and wanted to talk before it was too late. Brennan drove to San Diego immediately, meeting her at a hospice facility overlooking the ocean. Walsh had lost considerable weight, her skin gray and papery, but her eyes were still sharp and intelligent. "Thank you for coming," she said as Brennan sat beside her bed. "I wasn't sure you would." "Of course I came," Brennan replied. "What did you want to tell me?" Walsh took a labored breath. "The truth about the Rebecca Morgan autopsy. About why I changed my findings." Brennan leaned forward. "I'm listening." "After I filed my preliminary report indicating suspicious death," Walsh began, "I received a visit from two men. They identified themselves as consultants for the city attorney's office. They said there were concerns about my findings, that I'd overlooked evidence suggesting suicide." "What evidence?" Brennan asked. "That was the thing," Walsh said. "There was no new evidence. They were just reinterpreting what I'd already documented. The bruises on her arms could have been self-inflicted. The absence of a wine glass could have been explained by the victim herself disposing of it before taking the pills. Every inconsistency I'd noted, they had an alternative explanation for. But you didn't believe them," Brennan said. "No," Walsh replied. "I've been a medical examiner for 30 years. I know the difference between suicide and staged homicide. But these men made it clear that my career would suffer if I didn't reconsider my findings. They threatened you." "Not explicitly," Walsh said. "It was all very polite, very professional. But the message was unmistakable. Change the report or face consequences." They mentioned budget reviews, competency hearings, audits of my previous cases, death by 1,000 cuts. "So you transferred to San Diego," Brennan said. "I ran away," Walsh corrected bitterly. "I told myself I was protecting my career, my reputation. But really, I was just afraid. And because of my cowardice, a killer walked free." "Do you remember the names of these men?" Brennan asked, pulling out his notebook. "One was named Harrison," Walsh said. "Robert Harrison. He claimed to be a deputy city attorney, though I checked later and there's no one by that name in that office. The other never gave his name. He just stood by the door looking intimidating." "What did they look like?" Walsh described them in detail. Brennan wrote everything down, his mind already racing ahead to how he could identify them. "There's something else," Walsh said. "After I left Los Angeles, I heard that Dr. Richard Drummond had been appointed to review the case and issue a new report. Drummond is a good medical examiner, very thorough. I couldn't understand how he could look at the same evidence I'd seen and reach a completely different conclusion. Unless he was pressured too," Brennan said. "Or paid," Walsh added. "I don't have proof of that. But Drummond bought a very expensive house in Pasadena about 6 months after issuing his report. Could be coincidence. Or it could be blood money, Brennan said grimly. Walsh coughed, the sound wet and painful. She recovered slowly, then continued. I'm telling you this now because I'm dying, and I want whatever remains of my conscience to be clear, but also because I want you to know that you were right. Rebecca Morgan was murdered. The system covered it up, and people like me enabled it by staying silent. You're not staying silent now, Brennan said gently. Too little, too late, Walsh replied. But maybe it'll help somehow. It will, Brennan promised. Your testimony, even coming this late, matters. Would you be willing to put this in writing, sign an affidavit? Yes, Walsh said. Whatever you need. Brennan spent the next 2 hours taking her formal statement. By the time he left the hospice, the sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He felt energized for the first time in months. This was the break they needed. Dr. Patricia Walsh died 3 weeks later, but her sworn statement lived on, a powerful piece of evidence that the original autopsy had been compromised. Armed with this new information, Brennan and Sarah began investigating Robert Harrison and Dr. Richard Drummond. It took months of painstaking work, following financial trails and interviewing witnesses, but gradually a picture emerged. Robert Harrison wasn't a city attorney. He was a private attorney who did work for several high-profile clients, including David Lancaster. His specialty was making problems disappear quietly. Dr. Drummond had indeed purchased an expensive house in 1988, paying well above his apparent means. Further digging revealed that the down payment had come from an offshore account connected to a shell company. Tracing that company led to a network of businesses, one of which had financial ties to Lancaster Productions. It wasn't direct proof of bribery. Good attorneys could explain it away. But combined with Dr. Walsh's testimony about being pressured, it was enough to raise serious questions about the integrity of the second autopsy report. By spring of 1990, Brennan felt they had enough to approach the district attorney about reopening the case. But Margaret Sutherland, who'd been so supportive initially, was now facing re-election. She was reluctant to revisit a case that had already caused her political headaches. I sympathize with your position, she told Brennan during a tense meeting. But the reality is that prosecuting this case again would be incredibly difficult. Lancaster's attorneys will fight everything. Witnesses from 3 years ago may have trouble remembering details. And even if we win at trial, it could take years and millions of dollars. So we do nothing? Brennan asked incredulously. I'm saying we need to be strategic, Sutherland replied. Give me something absolutely definitive. A witness who directly observed the murder. Physical evidence that can't be disputed. Something that makes this case winnable. We gave you that 3 years ago, Brennan said bitterly, and you let political pressure derail it. That's not fair, Sutherland said sharply. I fought for this case as hard as I could given the circumstances. But not hard enough, Brennan replied. The meeting ended badly. Brennan left feeling defeated once again. Every time they built momentum, institutional barriers blocked their progress. It was exhausting. Chapter 14. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In July of 1990, a man named Vincent Caruso contacted the LAPD, requesting to speak with Detective Brennan. Caruso was in his early 40s, a former Hollywood stuntman who'd worked on various productions throughout the 80s. When Brennan met with him, Caruso seemed nervous, constantly looking around as if expecting to be followed. I have information about Rebecca Morgan's death, Caruso said, but I need protection. These people are dangerous. What people? Brennan asked. David Lancaster and his associates. Caruso replied. I did some work for them back in the 80s. Security, mostly. Making sure parties stayed private. Dealing with guests who got too drunk or caused problems. Were you at the party where Rebecca saw something she shouldn't have? Brennan asked. Yes, Caruso said. I was working security that night. I saw her go into Lancaster's study. Saw her come out looking upset. But that's not why I'm here. Then why are you here? Because I was there the night she died, Caruso said quietly. Brennan felt his pulse quicken. Tell me everything. Caruso took a deep breath. Lancaster called me on March 14th, late in the evening. Said he had a job for me. Paid in cash. No questions asked. I'd done similar work before. Usually involved roughing someone up or scaring them. I didn't think much of it. He told me to go to Rebecca Morgan's apartment around midnight. Said the door would be unlocked. Inside, I'd find a woman who'd taken too many pills. My job was to clean up the scene. Make sure there was no evidence of anyone else being there. But someone else had been there, Brennan said. Yeah, Caruso confirmed. A guy I'd never met before. Professional, cold. He was just finishing staging the scene when I arrived. We didn't talk much. He told me what needed to be done. We did it. Then we left separately. What needed to be done? Brennan asked. We wiped down surfaces for prints, Caruso said. Removed a wine glass and took it with us. Made sure the pill bottle and suicide note were positioned correctly. The guy I was with, he checked her pulse one last time, confirmed she was dead, then we locked up and left. Did you see him give her the pills? Brennan pressed. No, Caruso said. By the time I got there, she was already unconscious or dead. I couldn't tell which. But he told me he'd been there for about 30 minutes. Said she'd put up a struggle initially, but he'd convinced her to cooperate. Convinced her how? Caruso shook his head. He didn't say exactly, but he had bruises on his hands. Defensive marks. She fought him. Do you know this man's name? Brennan asked urgently. I know what Lancaster called him. Caruso said. Vincent. Which is my name too, so it stuck in my memory. Beyond that, I don't know his real identity, but I could describe him in detail if it helps. It helps enormously, Brennan said. Why are you coming forward now, 3 years later? Because I can't live with it anymore, Caruso said simply. I've got kids now. I look at them and think about Rebecca Morgan, about how she was somebody's kid too, about how she died scared and alone because men like me helped monsters like Lancaster. Plus, Caruso added, Lancaster hasn't paid me for another job I did 6 months ago. He's cutting ties with people who know too much, and I figure I'm on that list. Better to cooperate with you than wait for him to make me disappear. Brennan spent the next several hours taking Caruso's detailed statement. The stuntman described the other man involved, provided a timeline of events, explained exactly what they'd done to stage the suicide scene. It was devastating testimony that directly contradicted the official narrative. With Caruso's statement and Dr. Walsh's affidavit, Brennan finally had what he needed. 2 witnesses who could testify to the murder and cover up. Combined with all the circumstantial evidence they'd accumulated, it was enough to build a prosecutable case. But there was still the question of identifying the actual killer, the man Caruso had called Vincent. Working with a police sketch artist, Caruso helped create a detailed composite. The image was distributed to law enforcement agencies across California. Within a week, they had a match. The man's real name was Viktor Novak, a former Soviet intelligence operative who'd immigrated to the United States in the early 80s. He'd worked as a fixer and enforcer for various wealthy clients, specializing in problems that required discretion and ruthlessness. Finding Novak proved difficult. He'd dropped off the grid after Rebecca's death, possibly sensing that the heat was getting too intense. Brennan put out a nationwide alert, but months passed with no credible sightings. Meanwhile, armed with Caruso's testimony, District Attorney Sutherland finally agreed to reopen the Rebecca Morgan case and seek new murder charges against David Lancaster. The announcement was made in November of 1990, exactly 3.5 years after Rebecca's death. The news coverage was intense. Rebecca's story was back in headlines across the country. Television news programs revisited the case, interviewing the same people who'd been involved from the beginning. The narrative had shifted. This was no longer a story about allegations and uncertainty. This was about a murder finally being acknowledged, and a powerful man being held accountable. David Lancaster's attorneys immediately went on the offensive. They attacked Vincent Caruso's credibility, pointing out his criminal record and suggesting he was making up stories to avoid prosecution himself. They questioned why Dr. Walsh had waited so long to recant her revised findings. They filed dozens of motions seeking to suppress evidence and dismiss charges. But this time, the system didn't buckle. Sutherland had strong evidence and wasn't willing to back down again. The judge presiding over the preliminary hearing, Eleanor Martinez, was known for her independence and unwillingness to be swayed by political pressure. In December of 1990, Judge Martinez ruled that there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. David Lancaster was arraigned on charges of first-degree murder and conspiracy. Bail was set at $5 million, which he posted within hours. The trial was scheduled for March of 1991, 4 years after Rebecca's death. Epilogue. The truth about what happened on the night of March 14th, 1987, may never be fully known. The physical evidence that disappeared, the witnesses who recanted, the pressure applied at every level of the investigation, all ensured that the complete story remained hidden. But based on the evidence that survived and the testimony of those who eventually came forward, investigators believe the following scenario is most likely. After Daniel Foster warned David Lancaster that Rebecca planned to go to the press with evidence of abuse and criminal activity, Lancaster made a decision. He couldn't allow decades of carefully constructed power and influence to be destroyed by one idealistic young actress. He likely hired someone to handle the problem quietly. That person gained entry to Rebecca's apartment late on the night of March 14th. Whether through force or deception, they convinced or compelled her to ingest a lethal dose of barbiturates mixed with wine. They then staged the scene to look like suicide, planting a forged note. The wine glass was removed and disposed of to eliminate evidence. The bruises on Rebecca's arms were explained away as incidental. The investigation was derailed through a combination of political pressure, evidence tampering, and witness intimidation. It was a perfect crime, made possible by wealth, power, and a system designed to protect the influential at the expense of the vulnerable. But Rebecca Morgan had one thing her killers didn't count on: foresight. By hiding evidence before her death, by reaching out to people like Jennifer Hayes and Daniel Foster, by documenting everything she discovered, she ensured that even if justice eluded her, the truth would eventually emerge. That's the real story of the actress murdered in 1987. Not just the crime itself, but everything that came after. The failed prosecution, the cover-up, the civil suits, the media expose, the slow, painful process of accountability.